Flight attendant slaps black billionaire's daughter, CEO's phone call cancels entire flight. She has no business flying first class. Get her out of here now. My ticket says seat 2A, and that's where I'll be sitting. The tension in the first-class cabin was palpable as every passenger fell silent. Rachel Turner, a slender woman in her early 30s with close-cropped natural hair and a simple gray pantsuit, stood calmly in the aisle. Her hand firmly gripped the handle of her carry-on bag while she faced the flight attendant, Kimberly Wells, a middle-aged woman whose pinched expression grew increasingly agitated. "I don't care what your ticket says," Kimberly hissed, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper as she stepped closer to Rachel. "You clearly don't belong here. There must have been a mistake at the gate." Rachel didn't flinch. "There's no mistake. Please step aside so I can take my seat. We're delaying the flight." Kimberly's face flushed crimson as she glanced around at the other first-class passengers, mostly older white men in business suits who watched the confrontation with uncomfortable expressions. One elderly gentleman in particular, seated in 2B, observed with narrowed eyes. "Listen here." Kimberly's voice was rising now, her finger jabbing toward Rachel's face. "I've been flying this route for 20 years, and I know when someone's in the wrong place." That's when it happened. Rachel attempted to move past, and Kimberly, in a moment that would soon change everything, reached out and slapped Rachel across the face. The sharp sound cracked through the cabin like a gunshot. Gasps erupted from the other passengers. The elderly gentleman in 2B stood up immediately, his face a mask of shock. Rachel touched her cheek, stunned but composed. Then, with deliberate calmness, she reached for her phone. "Do you know who I am?" Rachel asked quietly. Kimberly smirked. "Playing that card, are we?" "I don't care who you think you are." Rachel dialed a number, her eyes never leaving Kimberly's. "Dad, it's me. I need you to make a call." 20 minutes later, the pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the inconvenience, but this flight has been canceled. All passengers will be deplaned immediately and rebooked. We sincerely apologize for the disruption." The look on Kimberly's face shifted from triumph to confusion to dawning horror as a representative from airline management appeared in the cabin doorway, requesting her to follow him immediately. But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 hours earlier when Rachel Turner woke up in her modest apartment, preparing for what should have been a routine business trip. Rachel's alarm chimed at 5:30 a.m., the gentle melody a stark contrast to the day that awaited her. She reached over to silence it, then lay still for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Today was important, perhaps the most important day of her career. After years of working behind the scenes at her father's company, Turner Innovations, she was finally taking the lead on a major acquisition. She rose from bed and moved to the window of her one-bedroom apartment. Despite being the daughter of James Turner, one of the country's few black billionaires and tech innovators, Rachel had insisted on making her own way. Her apartment was comfortable but far from luxurious, a decision that had puzzled many but made perfect sense to Rachel and those who truly knew her. "You can do this," she told her reflection in the bathroom mirror as she prepared for the day. At 32, Rachel had earned an MBA from Harvard and worked at 3 major tech companies before finally joining her father's firm 2 years ago. Even then, she had started in middle management, refusing any special treatment. Her phone rang as she was pulling on her jacket, a plain gray pantsuit that she wore like armor. "Good morning, Dad," she answered, tucking the phone between her ear and shoulder as she gathered her laptop. "Rachel," James Turner's deep voice carried the warmth it always held for his only child. At 68, James had built his empire from nothing, starting with a small electronics repair shop in the 1970s and eventually developing proprietary technology that revolutionized data storage. "Just checking in before your flight. Everything ready for the meeting?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Rachel replied, zipping her small carry-on. "The team sent over the final numbers last night. If West Coast Dynamics accepts our offer, it'll be the biggest acquisition in company history." "They'd be fools not to," James said with the confidence of a man who had rarely heard the word no in business for the past 20 years. "But Rachel, remember what I always say, a deal is only good if both sides feel they've won," she finished for him, smiling despite her nerves. "I know, Dad, I've got this." "I know you do, baby girl. That's why I'm sending you instead of going myself." There was pride in his voice, a pride that had sustained Rachel through every challenge she'd faced in a world that often questioned her right to be in the rooms where decisions were made. After ending the call, Rachel ordered a rideshare to the airport. Her driver, an older man named Walter, arrived promptly. "Airport, please," she said as she slid into the back seat. Walter nodded, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "Early flight?" Yes, to San Francisco, business. Walter pulled into the morning traffic. I remember my first trip to San Francisco. Summer of '69. What a time that was. Rachel smiled, relaxing slightly as Walter launched into a story about his younger days during the height of the counterculture movement. Those were different times, Walter said, shaking his head. Some things better, some worse. My grandson's about your age, working in computers too. Says things are changing, but sometimes I wonder if they're changing fast enough, you know. Rachel nodded, knowing exactly what the older man meant. Progress isn't always linear, she said. Sometimes it takes someone willing to push the boundaries. Walter caught her eye in the mirror and smiled. Well said, young lady, well said. The airport was bustling when they arrived. Rachel tipped Walter generously, wishing him a good day, and headed inside. Having checked in online, she moved directly to security, her TSA pre-check status allowing her to bypass the longer lines. As she waited to retrieve her items from the scanner, a harried mother with twins in a stroller struggled behind her. The security officer was being particularly rigid about the procedure for the children's shoes. Ma'am, both children need to remove their shoes, the officer repeated, his tone growing impatient. But they're asleep, the mother pleaded, looking on the verge of tears. And they're only two, can't you just— Rachel turned and approached. Excuse me, she said to the officer. I believe TSA regulations state that children under 12 aren't required to remove their shoes. These toddlers certainly qualify. The officer looked surprised, then checked with a supervisor who confirmed Rachel was correct. The mother shot Rachel a grateful look. Thank you, she whispered. I'm flying alone with them for the first time to visit their grandmother. I'm a nervous wreck. You've got this, Rachel assured her with a smile. And they clearly have a great mom. With that small good deed done, Rachel continued to her gate. The flight was scheduled to board in 40 minutes, so she found a quiet corner in the waiting area and opened her laptop to review her presentation one last time. The acquisition of West Coast Dynamics would diversify Turner Innovations' portfolio significantly, moving them from primarily data storage into cutting-edge artificial intelligence applications. The deal made sense on paper, but Rachel knew from experience that emotions and egos often played a larger role in these negotiations than anyone liked to admit. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant, Maya. WCD CEO confirmed for 2 p.m. meeting. Car will be waiting at SFO. Good luck. Rachel sent back a quick thanks and closed her laptop. The gate agent announced pre-boarding, and Rachel gathered her belongings. As a first-class passenger, she would be boarding next. When her zone was called, Rachel joined the line, boarding pass and ID in hand. The gate agent glanced at her documents, then up at her face, a flicker of surprise crossing his features before he quickly masked it. Have a nice flight, Miss Turner, he said, handing back her ID. Rachel nodded and moved down the jetway, all too familiar with that momentary look of surprise. Throughout her career, it had been a constant companion, the subtle double-take when she entered boardrooms, the raised eyebrows when she introduced herself as a senior executive, the assumptions that she must be someone's assistant rather than the decision-maker. The first-class cabin was half full when she boarded, mostly with older business travelers engrossed in newspapers or early morning cocktails. Rachel found her window seat, 2A, and settled in, placing her small bag in the overhead compartment. A distinguished-looking gentleman in his 70s was already seated in 2B. He nodded politely as Rachel took her seat. Morning, he said, folding his newspaper. Good morning, Rachel replied, buckling her seatbelt. Business or pleasure? He asked, the standard airplane small talk. Business, Rachel said with a small smile. You? Same, been making this trip once a month for nearly 30 years, he chuckled. Name's Harold Bennett. Rachel Turner. A flash of recognition crossed Harold's face. Turner not related to James Turner of Turner Innovations by any chance? Rachel hesitated only briefly. He's my father. Harold's eyebrows rose. Well, I've followed your father's career for years, remarkable man. I worked for IBM during the 80s when his first patents were causing quite a stir. He extended his hand. It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Turner. Rachel shook his hand, finding his genuine respect refreshing. Likewise, Mr. Bennett. Their conversation was interrupted as the final first-class passengers boarded. The flight attendant, Kimberly Wells, moved through the cabin, offering pre-flight drinks to the passengers, except Rachel noticed she seemed to be deliberately skipping her. When Rachel raised her hand to get Kimberly's attention, the flight attendant gave her a cool look. I'll be with you shortly, Kimberly said dismissively before turning to offer Harold a warm smile. What can I get for you, sir? Just water, thank you, Harold replied, casting a curious glance between Rachel and the flight attendant. After serving everyone else in first class, Kimberly finally returned to Rachel. "Yes," she asked, her tone distinctly less friendly than it had been with other passengers. "Water, please," Rachel requested politely. Kimberly returned moments later, practically placing the water on Rachel's tray table from a height that risked splashing. Harold frowned slightly but said nothing. Rachel took a sip of her water, maintaining her composure. She'd encountered this kind of treatment before. It was nothing new, though no less disappointing each time. The boarding continued as coach passengers filed past. The seats were nearly full when a commotion began at the front of the plane. A middle-aged white woman in an expensive-looking outfit was arguing with another flight attendant in the galley. "This is unacceptable," the woman's voice carried down the aisle. "I always fly first class." "There must be some mistake." The other flight attendant, a younger man, was trying to calm her. "I'm sorry, Ms. Winters, but the flight is completely full, and your reservation shows coach class." Kimberly immediately went to join them, conferring quietly with her colleague before approaching the agitated passenger with a completely different demeanor than she'd shown Rachel. "Ms. Winters, I'm so sorry for the confusion," Kimberly said soothingly. "Let me see what I can do." Rachel watched as Kimberly examined the passenger manifest, then returned to Ms. Winters with a smile. "It seems we may have a situation where someone was incorrectly assigned to first class," Kimberly said, just loud enough for the front rows to hear. Her eyes drifted deliberately to Rachel. "Let me investigate." Rachel felt her stomach tighten as Kimberly approached her seat. "Excuse me," Kimberly said, her voice now official and cold. "May I see your boarding pass again?" Rachel calmly retrieved her boarding pass from her jacket pocket and handed it over. Kimberly examined it, her lips pursed. "There seems to be some confusion," Kimberly said. "We have another passenger who believes she should be in first class." "My boarding pass clearly shows seat 2A, Rachel replied evenly. "There's no confusion on my part." Kimberly's eyes narrowed slightly. "Nevertheless, I need to verify this with the gate. In the meantime, perhaps you should gather your belongings." Harold Bennett shifted in his seat. "Excuse me," he interjected. "The young lady's boarding pass says 2A and she's in 2A. What exactly is the problem?" Kimberly fixed a tight smile on her face. "Sir, I'm just following procedure. Sometimes the system makes mistakes." "The only mistake I'm seeing is in your handling of this situation," Harold said firmly. Other passengers were now watching the exchange with interest. Rachel felt the familiar weight of being a spectacle, of having to maintain perfect composure under scrutiny. The confrontation escalated when Kimberly returned from checking with the gate, her expression now openly hostile. "She has no business flying first class. Get her out of here now." "My ticket says seat 2A, and that's where I'll be sitting." And that's where our story began, with the tension in the cabin rising to a breaking point, culminating in that shocking slap and Rachel's quiet phone call to her father. If you're enjoying this story, please consider subscribing to hear more stories like this. Now back to the aftermath of that fateful confrontation. As passengers filed off the canceled flight, confusion and frustration rippled through the crowd. Rachel remained in her seat, her cheek still stinging, as airline officials swarmed the cabin. Kimberly had been immediately escorted off the plane, her face ashen with the dawning realization of what she had done and to whom. Harold Bennett hadn't moved from his seat either. He turned to Rachel, his expression grave. "I've been flying for 50 years, he said, shaking his head. "I've never witnessed anything like that. Are you all right, Miss Turner?" Rachel nodded, the shock beginning to wear off. "I'll be fine, Mr. Bennett." This isn't my first encounter with prejudice, though it is perhaps the most public. A man in a crisp suit hurried down the aisle toward them, anxiety etched across his features. "Ms. Turner," he said, slightly out of breath. "I'm Dennis Morgan, the airline's chief operations officer for this terminal. On behalf of Atlantic Airlines, I want to express our deepest apologies for the inexcusable behavior you experienced today." Rachel regarded him steadily. "Mr. Morgan, what happened today isn't just about me. It's about a systemic problem that your airline clearly hasn't addressed effectively in its staff training and culture." Morgan nodded, sweat beading on his forehead. "You're absolutely right, and I assure you that this incident will be thoroughly investigated. Ms. Wells has been suspended effective immediately, pending termination proceedings." "And the other passengers?" Rachel asked. "How are you accommodating them?" Morgan seemed surprised by her concern for others. "We're rebooking everyone on the next available flights, offering meal vouchers and compensation for the inconvenience." "Good," Rachel said. "Because while what happened to me was inexcusable, these other passengers shouldn't suffer for it." She gestured to the lingering passengers who were watching the exchange with interest. "As for me," Rachel continued, I have an important meeting in San Francisco this afternoon that can't be rescheduled. I need to be on the next flight out. Of course, Morgan nodded vigorously. We've already arranged for you to take our executive shuttle that was scheduled for maintenance crew transport. It departs in 30 minutes. And naturally, Atlantic Airlines would like to offer you our sincere apologies and compensation for what I want, Rachel interrupted, is a commitment to change. My father didn't make that call just to get revenge or special treatment. He made it because no passenger should ever be treated that way. She stood, gathering her belongings. I'll have my legal team contact your offices about what that commitment will look like. Harold Bennett stood as well, collecting his newspaper. If you need a witness to what transpired here, Ms. Turner, I'd be happy to provide a statement. Thank you, Mr. Bennett, Rachel said with genuine gratitude. That might be helpful. As they exited the plane together, followed closely by the nervous Mr. Morgan, Rachel noticed the other first-class passengers watching her with new eyes, some with embarrassment for not having spoken up, others with newfound respect. In the terminal, a crowd had gathered as news of the incident spread. Rachel spotted Diane Winters, the woman who had tried to claim a first-class seat, among them. The woman averted her gaze when Rachel looked her way. Ms. Turner, Morgan said as they reached the VIP lounge, the executive shuttle will board from gate E4. Is there anything else you need in the meantime? Just some privacy, thank you, Rachel replied, suddenly feeling the weight of the morning's events. Once alone in the lounge, Rachel finally allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. Her hands trembled slightly as she called her father back. Rachel, James Turner's voice was tense. What's happening now? They've canceled the flight. Kimberly, the flight attendant, has been suspended. They're arranging an executive shuttle for me. She took a deep breath. Dad, I'm not sure that call was necessary. It's going to be all over the news. It was absolutely necessary, James replied firmly. You think I built this company and this reputation to stand by while my daughter is assaulted for simply existing in a space someone decided she shouldn't be in? His voice softened. Rachel, I know you've always wanted to make your own way, and I respect that, but sometimes you need to use every tool at your disposal to fight injustice. Rachel sighed. I know, but now the meeting with West Coast Dynamics will proceed exactly as planned, James finished for her. In fact, I just got off the phone with Gregory Marshall. Rachel's eyebrows shot up. Gregory Marshall was the CEO of West Coast Dynamics. You called him. He called me, actually. Apparently, one of his board members was on your flight. News travels fast. Rachel closed her eyes. Great. So now instead of seeing me as a capable executive, they'll see me as the billionaire's daughter who got slapped and called daddy. James chuckled, surprising her. Actually, Marshall was impressed, said anyone who could maintain composure in that situation while simultaneously taking decisive action is exactly the kind of leadership they want to be in business with. Rachel was silent for a moment, processing this unexpected turn. Rachel, you've spent your whole life trying to prove yourself on your own merits, and I understand why. But sometimes, being a Turner isn't just about the privilege, it's about having the power to create change. What happened today isn't just about you or me. It's about making sure it doesn't happen to someone else who might not have the resources to fight back. Rachel knew her father was right. For years, she distanced herself from the Turner name and fortune, determined to succeed on her own terms. She'd lived in a modest apartment, taken the subway, started at the bottom of companies despite her Harvard MBA. And while she'd proven her capabilities time and again, incidents like today's were sharp reminders that no amount of personal achievement could fully shield her from prejudice. I understand, Dad, she said finally. And you're right. We have a responsibility to use our position to create change. That's my girl, James said warmly. Now go close that deal and we'll talk about next steps when you get back. After ending the call, Rachel sat quietly, gathering her thoughts before the executive shuttle flight. A soft knock on the lounge door interrupted her reflection. Come in, she called. The door opened to reveal a young woman in an Atlantic Airlines uniform. Unlike Kimberly, she had a warm, open face. Ms. Turner. I'm Maya Johnson. I'll be your flight attendant on the executive shuttle to San Francisco. She hesitated, then added, I just wanted to say how sorry I am about what happened. Ms. Wells doesn't represent all of us at Atlantic. Rachel nodded. Thank you, Maya. The shuttle is ready whenever you are, Maya added. And I've admired your father's work for years. His scholarship program helped my brother attend MIT. This revelation surprised Rachel. The Turner Tech Scholars. Your brother was a recipient? Maya nodded proudly. Class of 2018. He works at NASA now. For the first time that morning, Rachel felt a genuine smile spread across her face. The Turner Tech Scholars had been her mother's initiative before she passed away 10 years ago, a program specifically designed to help minority students pursue STEM education. Rachel had been so focused on escaping her father's shadow that she sometimes forgot the real impact their family name had made. "Thank you for sharing that, Maya. It means more than you know." 30 minutes later, Rachel was aboard the small executive jet, the only passenger besides two airline executives who sat at the front, clearly uncomfortable and unsure how to address her. Maya served her with professional courtesy, and the flight took off without incident. As they flew west, Rachel stared out the window at the vast American landscape below. Her thoughts drifted to her mother, Elizabeth Turner, who had been the family's moral compass until her death from cancer. Elizabeth had grown up in the civil rights era, had marched with King in the 1960s as a child, and had never let her husband's growing wealth separate her from the struggles of their community. "Money gives you a voice," Elizabeth had always told Rachel. "Make sure you use it to speak for those who can't be heard." Rachel had interpreted that to mean she should make her own way, prove her worth beyond the Turner name. But perhaps, she now realized, her mother had meant something different, that the privilege she'd been born into carried responsibility. The small jet began its descent into San Francisco International Airport. Rachel gathered her belongings, feeling a newfound resolve. The West Coast Dynamics acquisition was no longer just a business transaction. It was an opportunity to expand Turner Innovations' influence, and with it, their capacity to create meaningful change. As promised, a car was waiting for Rachel when she deplaned. The driver, an older black man named Joseph, greeted her with quiet respect. "Ms. Turner, welcome to San Francisco. I understand you've had a challenging morning." Rachel smiled wryly. "News travels fast." "It does indeed," Joseph replied, taking her bag. "Especially when it involves a Turner. Your father made quite an impression in these parts during the tech boom. There are many who still remember how he gave local businesses a chance when the bigger corporations were pushing them out." During the drive into the city, Rachel's phone buzzed constantly with notifications. The incident had apparently gone viral, with witnesses from the flight posting accounts online. Her assistant had sent multiple messages warning her that reporters were requesting comments. Rachel texted back, "No comment until after my meeting. Have legal prepare a statement focusing on systemic change, not personal grievance." The offices of West Coast Dynamics occupied the top floors of a gleaming tower in downtown San Francisco. Rachel arrived with 15 minutes to spare before her meeting, enough time to center herself and review her key points once more. The receptionist recognized her immediately. "Ms. Turner, we've been expecting you. Mr. Marshall asked that you be shown directly to the conference room. The board is assembled and ready whenever you are." This was unexpected. Rachel had anticipated meeting with Marshall alone first. A full board meeting suggested they were taking this acquisition more seriously than she'd thought. As she was led through the hallways, Rachel caught glimpses of employees watching her with undisguised curiosity. By now, the morning's incident had undoubtedly reached everyone in the tech community. The conference room doors opened to reveal Gregory Marshall and the entire West Coast Dynamics board, 12 people seated around a massive table, most of them older white men in expensive suits, with a few women and people of color interspersed. All eyes turned to Rachel as she entered. Gregory Marshall, a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, rose to greet her. "Ms. Turner, thank you for joining us, especially after the ordeal you experienced this morning. Please, have a seat." Rachel moved to the head of the table where a place had been prepared for her presentation. "Thank you for accommodating the meeting, Mr. Marshall. I'm eager to discuss how Turner Innovations and West Coast Dynamics can create something extraordinary together." Marshall nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Before we begin, I believe I speak for everyone here when I say we were disturbed by the reports of what occurred on your flight. Bernard here," he gestured to an older board member, "was a witness and filled us in on the details." Bernard, a distinguished black man in his 70s, nodded gravely at Rachel. "Ms. Turner handled herself with remarkable poise in an inexcusable situation," he told the room. Rachel thanked him with a nod, then addressed the board. "While I appreciate the concern, I'd prefer to focus our limited time on the business at hand. The personal incident this morning and any actions that may stem from it are separate from why I'm here today." A murmur of approval went around the table. Marshall smiled. "Direct and professional, just like your father. Please proceed with your presentation." For the next hour, Rachel outlined Turner Innovations' vision for the acquisition, how West Coast Dynamics AI technology would complement their data storage systems, the retention plans for key personnel, the proposed leadership structure, and the 5-year growth strategy. She fielded questions confidently, demonstrating a deep understanding of both companies' strengths and weaknesses. As the presentation concluded, Rachel noticed Marshall exchanging glances with several board members. There seemed to be a silent communication happening. "Ms. Turner," Marshall said finally, "your proposal is comprehensive and compelling. We had some reservations going into this meeting, primarily concerning leadership continuity and cultural integration. However, I think I speak for the board when I say those concerns have been largely addressed." Bernard leaned forward. "If I may, Gregory, Ms. Turner, one question remains for many of us. Why is James Turner sending his daughter to negotiate this deal rather than coming himself? No disrespect to your obvious capabilities, but this represents a significant pivot for both our companies." The question was direct, but not unexpected. Rachel had prepared for it. "My father believes in putting the right people in the right positions, regardless of family connection," she replied. "I've earned my place at this table through my work, not my last name. But more importantly, this acquisition isn't just about the immediate integration, it's about the future. I represent the next generation of leadership at Turner Innovations, and my father wanted you to see that future firsthand." Marshall nodded slowly, seemingly satisfied. "Well said. The board will need to confer, of course, but speaking personally, I believe we have the foundation for an agreement." As the meeting adjourned, Bernard approached Rachel privately. "Ms. Turner, a word." "Course," Rachel replied. Bernard's expression was serious. "What happened to you this morning? I've been there. Many times in many variations over many decades. In 1962, I was denied a seat at a lunch counter in Georgia. In 1975, I was refused service in a Manhattan restaurant despite wearing a $1,000 suit. In 1989, I was followed by security through every department of a high-end store where I was trying to buy my wife an anniversary gift." Rachel listened silently, recognizing the shared experience that transcended their age difference. "Each time," Bernard continued, "I had a choice to accept it quietly or to fight back. The methods of fighting back have changed over the years, but the necessity hasn't." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "What your father did today, using his power to demand accountability, that's how we create change in 2025. Don't ever apologize for it." Rachel felt a lump in her throat. "Thank you, Mr. Bernard Washington," he smiled. "Your mother would be proud of you. She and I served on the Urban League board together in the 90s. Remarkable woman." The mention of her mother caught Rachel by surprise. "You knew my mother?" "Indeed, I did. Elizabeth never backed down from what was right, but she also knew how to build bridges instead of walls, a rare combination." He checked his watch. "I should rejoin the board." "But Ms. Turner, Rachel, whatever you and your father decide to do about this morning's incident, you have allies here." As Rachel left the West Coast Dynamics offices, she felt a sense of clarity she hadn't experienced in years. The meeting had gone well, the acquisition was likely to proceed, but more importantly, she'd begun to reconcile the two parts of herself she'd kept separate for so long, the self-made professional and the Turner heir. Her phone rang as she reached the lobby. It was her father again. "How did it go?" James asked without preamble. "Very well," Rachel replied. "Marshall seemed convinced and the board was receptive. Bernard Washington sends his regards, by the way," James chuckled. "Bernard's a good man, one of the few who never treated me differently when I started making real money." He paused. "Rachel, there's something else we need to discuss. The incident on the plane has gone viral. Atlantic Airline's stock is down 12% today. They've issued a formal apology and fired Kimberly Wells." Rachel stepped outside into the San Francisco sunshine. "That was fast. They're in damage control mode. Their CEO has requested a meeting with us tomorrow. I think we have an opportunity here." "What kind of opportunity?" Rachel asked, though she was beginning to see it herself. "The kind your mother would have recognized immediately," James replied. "This isn't just about one flight attendant or even one airline. It's about using this moment to create lasting change in how these companies train their staff, set their policies, and handle these situations." Rachel hailed a taxi, her mind racing with possibilities. "I agree, and I think I know how we approach it." "I'm listening," James said. "The Turner Foundation," Rachel said, referring to the family's philanthropic arm. "We establish a new initiative focused on corporate diversity and inclusivity training, starting with the airline industry. We offer Atlantic Airlines the chance to be the founding partner. They fund it, implement it company-wide, and help us develop the program that we can then roll out to other companies." James was silent for a moment. "Instead of punishing them, we give them a chance to lead the change." "Exactly," Rachel said, climbing into the taxi. "It's a win for them from a PR perspective, and it creates something sustainable that can help address the root of the problem." Elizabeth would have loved that approach, James said, his voice thick with emotion. Using the leverage, we have to create opportunity rather than simply demand retribution. I learned from the best, Rachel replied softly. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, Rachel gave the driver the address of her hotel. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. A photo of her on the plane had been published, Kimberly's hand captured mid-slap. The headline read, "Airline under fire after employee assaults prominent executive." Rachel put her phone away, not wanting to dwell on the image. Tomorrow would be soon enough to address the media storm. For now, she wanted to process everything that had happened and prepare for the meeting with Atlantic Airlines. At her hotel, Rachel ordered room service and opened her laptop to draft a proposal for what she was already calling the Inclusivity Innovation Initiative. As she worked, she reflected on the day's events, how a simple business trip had turned into a pivotal moment not just for her career, but for her understanding of her place in the world. Her phone rang again. This time it was Harold Bennett. "Ms. Turner," his voice came through clearly. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, Mr. Bennett. How did you get my number?" Harold chuckled. "I have some connections at Atlantic Airlines. Hope you don't mind the liberty. I wanted to check how you were doing and to let you know that I've provided a detailed statement to both the airline and several news outlets that requested comment." Rachel felt a surge of gratitude. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Bennett." "Not kind necessary," Harold corrected. "In my 72 years, I've witnessed a lot of changes in this country. Some progress, some backsliding. But what doesn't change is the need for people of conscience to speak up when they see injustice." They spoke for a few more minutes, with Harold offering his support if Rachel needed anything further. After they hung up, Rachel returned to her proposal with renewed energy. By midnight, she had a comprehensive framework ready to present to Atlantic Airlines, one that would transform a moment of discrimination into an opportunity for lasting change. The next morning, Rachel woke to find her incident dominating the news cycle. Her father had arranged for a car to take her to the airport for her return flight to New York, where they would meet with Atlantic Airlines' executive team. As she checked out of her hotel, the young woman at the desk looked at her with recognition. "Ms. Turner, I just want to say, thank you for standing up. My sister works as a flight attendant for another airline, and she says this kind of thing happens more than people realize. Usually there are no consequences." Rachel thanked her and headed out to her waiting car. The driver, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, greeted her warmly. "Back to the airport, Ms. Turner?" "Yes, please." As they drove, Patricia glanced at Rachel in the rearview mirror. "You're her, aren't you, from the news?" Rachel nodded, bracing herself for more questions. But Patricia simply said, "Good for you. My daughter is entering corporate America next year after she graduates. Women like you make the path a little easier for her." At the airport, Rachel was surprised to find airport staff waiting for her at the drop-off area. A representative approached her car as it pulled up. "Ms. Turner, I'm Robert Chen, Customer Experience Director for SFO. We'd like to escort you through a private security checkpoint to minimize any disruption." Rachel understood immediately. They were concerned about media presence or public recognition causing a scene. She accepted the offer gratefully and soon found herself in Atlantic Airlines' premium lounge, awaiting her flight in privacy. Maya Johnson, the same flight attendant from the executive shuttle, appeared at the lounge entrance. "Ms. Turner, I'll be on your flight to New York today. The captain asked me to let you know we're ready to board whenever you are. We can take you directly to the aircraft now if you'd prefer to avoid the gate area." Rachel smiled at the young woman. "Thank you, Maya. I appreciate that." As they walked through the private corridor to the plane, Maya seemed nervous. "Ms. Turner, I hope you don't mind me asking, but there are rumors that Atlantic Airlines might be facing a major lawsuit or even restructuring because of what happened." "What do you think should happen, Maya?" Rachel asked, genuinely curious. Maya considered the question carefully. "I think the problem goes deeper than one flight attendant or even one incident. There's a culture that needs to change. Many of us try to provide excellent service to all passengers, but there's an undercurrent of assumptions that never get addressed in our training." Rachel nodded. "That's very insightful, and I agree." They reached the aircraft, where the captain and co-pilot were waiting to greet her personally. The first-class cabin was empty except for one passenger, Harold Bennett, who stood when he saw her. "Ms. Turner," he said with a smile, "it seems we're travel companions again." "Mr. Bennett," Rachel replied, pleasantly surprised. "Heading back to New York as well?" "Indeed, though I must admit I switched my flight to this one after yesterday's events. I thought you might appreciate a friendly face." The gesture touched Rachel deeply. She took her seat 1A this time, and Harold settled in across the aisle in 1B. The flight crew treated her with impeccable courtesy, and soon they were airborne, leaving the drama of the previous day physically behind, if not emotionally. Midway through the flight, Harold moved to sit beside Rachel when the seat became available. "If you don't mind," he said, "there's something I'd like to discuss with you." "Of course." Harold's expression grew serious. "I've been thinking about your situation, and I believe I might be able to offer some assistance with whatever you're planning next." "What makes you think I'm planning something?" Rachel asked with a small smile. Harold chuckled. "Because you're James Turner's daughter, and I've known your father by reputation for decades. He built his empire not just by seizing opportunities, but by creating them out of challenges." Rachel studied the older man with newfound interest. "What exactly do you do, Mr. Bennett?" "I sit on the boards of several major corporations, including a media conglomerate and 2 airlines, though not Atlantic, obviously. In my younger days, I helped draft some of the first corporate diversity initiatives after the Civil Rights Act made discrimination in the workplace illegal. They were rudimentary by today's standards, but they were a start." Rachel's eyes widened. "You were involved in early corporate diversity work?" Harold nodded. "It was a different time. Companies were being forced to integrate, and many were looking for guidance on how to do it with minimal disruption to their business. I was one of the few black executives who had the credentials they respected and the experiences they needed to understand." The coincidence seemed almost too perfect. "Mr. Bennett, I'm developing a proposal for Atlantic Airlines, a corporate training and policy initiative focused on inclusivity, funded by them but developed and implemented through our foundation." Harold's eyes lit up. "That's exactly the kind of constructive approach that creates lasting change. I'd be honored to offer my expertise if you think it would be helpful." For the remainder of the flight, Rachel and Harold discussed the details of her proposal, with Harold offering insights from his decades of experience in corporate America. By the time they began their descent into New York, the Inclusivity Innovation Initiative had evolved into something far more comprehensive and impactful than Rachel had initially envisioned. As the plane touched down, Rachel felt a sense of purpose that went beyond the business acquisition she'd originally set out to complete. The West Coast Dynamics deal would proceed. The confirmation email had arrived during the flight, but it now seemed secondary to this new mission that had quite literally fallen into her lap. James Turner was waiting for Rachel when she deplaned. At 68, he still cut an imposing figure, tall and distinguished, with gray hair and the confident bearing of a man accustomed to commanding rooms. His face broke into a wide smile when he saw his daughter, and he embraced her warmly. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered. "Your mother would be too." When they separated, Rachel introduced Harold. James's eyes widened in recognition. "Harold Bennett, the Harold Bennett who challenged IBM's hiring practices in '78. Harold looked surprised and pleased. "You remember that?" "Remember it. I studied it when I was building my first company. Your case set precedents that made it possible for entrepreneurs like me to break into spaces that had been closed to us." The 2 men shook hands with mutual respect, and James insisted that Harold join them for the meeting with Atlantic Airlines, which was scheduled for that afternoon at Turner Innovations headquarters. The Atlantic Airlines delegation was already waiting when they arrived. The CEO, Victor Pearson, the Chief Operating Officer, Melissa Chang, and the Head of Human Resources, Daniel Rodriguez. Their expressions were a mixture of contrition and apprehension as James led Rachel and Harold into the conference room. "Thank you for meeting with us," Pearson began immediately. "First and foremost, on behalf of Atlantic Airlines, I want to extend our deepest apologies to Ms. Turner for the inexcusable treatment she received." James nodded but said nothing, allowing Rachel to take the lead as they had discussed. Rachel took a seat at the head of the table, with her father and Harold flanking her. "Mr. Pearson, what happened to me is unfortunately not unique. What is unique is that I have the resources and platform to ensure it doesn't go unaddressed." Pearson nodded, looking uncomfortable. "We understand, and we're prepared to offer." Rachel held up a hand. "Before we discuss compensation or settlements, I'd like to present an alternative approach." She distributed copies of the proposal she and Harold had refined on the flight. "This is our vision for the Inclusivity Innovation Initiative." For the next 30 minutes, Rachel outlined the proposal, a comprehensive program that would include revised training for all Atlantic Airlines staff, new policies for handling discrimination, complaints from both employees and passengers, regular blind testing of service quality, and the creation of a diverse advisory board to provide ongoing guidance. Instead of a punitive approach, we're offering you the opportunity to be the leader in transforming how the airline industry addresses these issues, Rachel concluded. The Turner Foundation will provide the framework and expertise, but Atlantic Airlines would be the founding partner and primary implementer. The Atlantic executives exchanged glances. Melissa Chang, the COO, leaned forward with interest. The cost of implementing this would be substantial. Less than the cost of the lawsuit we could pursue, James interjected quietly, and significantly less than the long-term damage to your brand if we choose to make this a public battle. Daniel Rodriguez, the HR head, was already reading through the proposal with a professional eye. This is remarkably thorough. The training modules addressing unconscious bias are particularly impressive. Victor Pearson studied Rachel thoughtfully. Ms. Turner, you could have simply destroyed Kimberly Wells' career and demanded millions in damages. Instead, you're offering us a partnership. Why? Rachel met his gaze steadily. Because firing one flight attendant doesn't solve the underlying problem, and a financial settlement might ease my conscience, but it wouldn't prevent the next incident. This initiative has the potential to create real change, not just at Atlantic Airlines, but potentially throughout the industry. Harold Bennett, who had been quietly observing, now spoke up. Mr. Pearson, I've spent 50 years in corporate America. I've seen how these situations typically play out: a public apology, a settlement with a non-disclosure agreement, perhaps some cursory additional training that's forgotten within months. What Ms. Turner is offering you is rare, a chance to transform a potential crisis into industry leadership. Pearson looked at his colleagues, then back at Rachel. We need to review this in detail and discuss it with our board, but speaking personally, I believe this approach aligns with the direction I've been trying to take the company. Would you be willing to give us 48 hours to provide a formal response? Rachel nodded. Of course, but I should note that we've already received inquiries from several major news outlets. We've declined to comment until after this meeting, but we will need to make some statements soon. Understood, Pearson replied. Expedite our decision process. As the meeting concluded and the Atlantic executives departed, James turned to Rachel with undisguised pride. You never cease to amaze me. This initiative, it's exactly what your mother would have created. I had help, Rachel said, glancing at Harold, who smiled modestly. Sometimes the right people come into our lives at precisely the moment we need them, James said. Now, shall we head home? I think we both could use some rest after these past 2 days. The next morning, Rachel woke in her childhood bedroom in her father's Manhattan penthouse. She decided to stay with him rather than return to her apartment, wanting the comfort of family after the emotional roller coaster of recent events. She found James in the kitchen, something that still surprised her even after all these years. Despite their wealth and the staff available to them, James Turner still insisted on making his own coffee every morning, a habit from his early days when luxury had been unimaginable. Morning, Dad, Rachel said, accepting the cup he offered her. Sleep well? He asked, studying her face. Better than expected, she admitted. Any word from Atlantic? James nodded, looking pleased. Pearson called an emergency board meeting last night. They've unanimously approved the initiative with a few minor modifications they'd like to discuss. They're prepared to announce it jointly with us whenever we're ready. Rachel felt a wave of satisfaction. That was faster than I expected. They're smart enough to recognize a lifeline when it's thrown to them, James replied. But more importantly, I think Pearson genuinely believes in what you've proposed. Sometimes people just need a push to do what they already know is right. Rachel's phone buzzed with a news alert. She opened it to find that the story had evolved, now focusing not just on the incident itself, but on the speculation about how Turner Innovations might respond. We should schedule a press conference, Rachel said, scrolling through the coverage. Make the announcement formal with Atlantic Airlines participating. James nodded in agreement. I'll have the PR team arrange it. And Rachel, I've been thinking about something else as well. What's that? The Turner Foundation has always been important to our family, but it's been somewhat secondary to the company itself. Maybe it's time we elevated its role with you at the helm. Rachel looked up from her phone, surprised. Me? But I've just started making real progress at Turner Innovations. James smiled. Who says you can't do both? The acquisition of West Coast Dynamics puts you in the perfect position to bridge our commercial and philanthropic efforts. Technology that serves humanity, that was always the vision. Rachel considered the suggestion. She'd spent so long trying to prove herself in the corporate world that she'd never seriously considered leading the foundation. But now, after what had happened, she could see the potential impact more clearly. I'll think about it, she promised. The press conference was scheduled for the following day. Atlantic Airlines CEO Victor Pearson would appear alongside Rachel and James to announce the Inclusivity Innovation Initiative. Harold Bennett had agreed to serve as the initiative's first chairperson, bringing his decades of experience to guide its implementation. As Rachel prepared her remarks that evening, she reflected on the remarkable chain of events that had unfolded from that moment of confrontation on the plane. What had begun as an all-too-familiar experience of discrimination had transformed into an opportunity to create meaningful change. Her phone rang. It was Maya Johnson from Atlantic Airlines. "Ms. Turner, I hope it's okay that I called. Mr. Pearson gave me your number. I wanted to thank you for what you're doing. The initiative. It's already creating buzz among the staff. People are talking about real change, not just damage control." Rachel smiled. "I'm glad to hear that, Maya. You were part of the inspiration, you know. Your brother's story reminded me of the positive impact my family has had and can continue to have." Maya's voice was emotional when she replied, "My brother and I both grew up looking up to your father. Now we'll be looking up to you too." The day of the press conference arrived with substantial media interest. The Turner Innovations lobby had been transformed to accommodate dozens of journalists and cameras. Rachel stood backstage with her father, Harold, and the Atlantic Airlines executives, reviewing their joint statement one final time. Victor Pearson seemed genuinely enthusiastic about the initiative, having embraced it fully once he understood its potential. "My daughter asked me last night why it took something like this to make us take these issues seriously," he told Rachel quietly. "I didn't have a good answer for her. The important thing is that you're taking action now," Rachel replied. "That's what matters going forward." As they prepared to face the press, James pulled Rachel aside for a private moment. "Before we go out there," he said, his voice unexpectedly emotional, "I want you to know something. When your mother died, I worried that her spirit, her commitment to using our position to help others, might fade from the company as it grew. You've proven today that her legacy lives on through you." Rachel felt tears threatening and took a deep breath to compose herself. "I spent so many years trying to distance myself from the Turner name, trying to be just Rachel. But maybe being a Turner isn't something to escape from. It's something to live up to." James squeezed her hand. "You already have, my dear. You already have." They stepped onto the stage together, united as father and daughter, but also as business leaders with a vision for change. The cameras flashed as Rachel approached the microphone, poised to transform a moment of personal humiliation into a catalyst for progress. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and confident. "3 days ago, I boarded a flight as a business executive on my way to an important meeting. What happened next has been well documented in the media. But today, we're here to talk about what happens now, not just for me or for Atlantic Airlines, but for an industry and hopefully for our society." As Rachel outlined the Inclusivity Innovation Initiative, she could see the story taking shape in the journalist's expressions, from scandal to redemption, from conflict to collaboration, from problem to solution. This wasn't the narrative they had expected, and that made it all the more powerful. When the formal presentation concluded and the questions began, Rachel handled them with the same composure she had shown on that fateful flight. Yes, Kimberly Wells had been terminated, but no, this wasn't about one individual's actions. Yes, this initiative would cost Atlantic Airlines millions to implement, but no, there was no additional financial settlement involved. Yes, this was personal for the Turner family, but it was also business, the business of creating a more equitable society where everyone was treated with dignity. The final question came from a veteran journalist who had covered Turner Innovations for decades. "Ms. Turner, you've maintained a remarkably low profile despite your family name. Does this initiative represent a new chapter in your public role?" Rachel glanced at her father, then back to the reporter. "I believe it represents a recognition of something I've perhaps been reluctant to embrace. That influence comes with responsibility. The Turner name opens doors, but what matters is what we do once we're in the room. Today, we're using that influence to open doors for others." The press conference ended to enthusiastic applause, not just from the Turner and Atlantic teams, but from many of the journalists as well, a rare occurrence that signaled the positive reception of the initiative. As they left the stage, Harold Bennett approached Rachel with a warm smile. "You know, in all my years working on corporate diversity, I've never seen a more promising start to an initiative. The combination of moral authority, business leverage, and genuine commitment, it's powerful." "We have a lot of work ahead of us," Rachel acknowledged. "Yes, but it's good work," Harold replied. "The kind that gives meaning to all the rest." In the weeks that followed, The Inclusivity Innovation Initiative moved from concept to reality with remarkable speed. Atlantic Airlines became not just a participant, but a champion, with CEO Victor Pearson personally introducing the first training modules to his executive team. Other airlines began making inquiries, concerned about their own practices and eager to avoid similar incidents. Rachel divided her time between overseeing the West Coast Dynamics acquisition and building the framework for the initiative's expansion. The foundation hired a diverse team of experts in corporate training, policy development, and cultural change management, with Harold Bennett providing invaluable guidance as chairperson. Kimberly Wells, the flight attendant whose actions had precipitated everything, reached out through her lawyer to request a meeting with Rachel. After some consideration, Rachel agreed. They met at a quiet cafe in Midtown Manhattan. Kimberly looked different out of her uniform, smaller somehow, her confidence deflated. She seemed nervous as Rachel sat down across from her. "Thank you for agreeing to see me, Ms. Turner," Kimberly began, her voice subdued. I wanted to apologize in person for my actions. There's no excuse for how I treated you." Rachel studied the woman who had slapped her. "What made you do it, Ms. Wells? I'd like to understand." Kimberly looked down at her hands. "I've been asking myself the same question. I've been flying that route for 20 years, and somewhere along the way I developed expectations about who belongs where when you didn't fit that expectation." She trailed off, then looked up with tears in her eyes. "But that's not an excuse. It was wrong, and I'm truly sorry." Rachel nodded, accepting the apology but not offering absolution. "What will you do now?" "I'm not sure," Kimberly admitted. "Oh, Airline will hire me after this, but maybe that's as it should be. I've been looking into community college courses, thinking maybe it's time for a change." Rachel considered this, then made a decision. "The initiative we're developing includes a component on rehabilitation and reintegration for employees who have demonstrated bias but show genuine remorse and willingness to change. It's still in development, but when it's ready. If you're interested, there might be an opportunity for you to participate." Kimberly looked startled. "You'd be willing to give me another chance after what I did?" "Not me personally," Rachel clarified. "The program would have independent evaluators, but yes, I believe in second chances when they're earned through genuine effort and change." As they parted ways, Rachel felt a sense of closure. The incident would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her experience. Instead, it had become the catalyst for something much larger than herself. 6 months later, Rachel stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Hilton Midtown, addressing the first annual Inclusivity Innovation Conference. Before her sat representatives from over 50 major corporations, including executives from every major airline in the country. "What began as a single incident on a flight last spring has evolved into a movement within the corporate world," Rachel told the assembled leaders. "The data is clear. Companies that have implemented our training and policy frameworks are seeing measurable improvements not just in customer satisfaction, but in employee retention and even in profitability." In the front row sat James Turner, now semi-retired and focused primarily on mentoring the next generation of Black entrepreneurs. Beside him was Harold Bennett, whose wisdom had helped shape the initiative from its inception. And next to Harold was Bernard Washington from West Coast Dynamics, whose company had become the first tech firm to adopt the initiative's recommendations. "Today, we announce the expansion of the Inclusivity Innovation Initiative beyond the transportation sector into healthcare, hospitality, and retail," Rachel continued. "Because dignity is not a luxury, it's a right that belongs to everyone in every space, regardless of who they are or what they look like." The applause was thunderous as Rachel concluded her remarks. As she stepped away from the podium, she caught her father's eye. James nodded, a gesture of pride and acknowledgement that meant more to Rachel than any business success ever could. Later, at the reception, Maya Johnson approached Rachel with a broad smile. The young flight attendant had become one of the initiative's most effective ambassadors within Atlantic Airlines. "Ms. Turner," Maya said warmly, "I wanted to let you know that my brother just accepted a position at Turner Innovations. He'll be working on the AI ethics team at West Coast Dynamics." Rachel smiled. "That's wonderful news. We're lucky to have him." "He says the same about having you as a leader," Maya replied. "We all do." As the evening wound down, Rachel found herself standing near a window overlooking the New York skyline with her father. "Your mother used to say that true success isn't measured by what you achieve for yourself, but by what you make possible for others," James said, his gaze fixed on the glittering city lights. "By that measure, I think you've surpassed even my accomplishments." Rachel leaned her head against her father's shoulder, just as she had as a little girl. I couldn't have done any of it without the foundation you built both literally and figuratively. That's the point of foundations, James replied with a smile. They're meant to be built upon. As they stood together, Rachel reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. A slap on an airplane had set in motion a chain of events that had transformed not just her own understanding of her place in the world, but potentially the experiences of countless others who would never know her name. It wasn't the path she had envisioned for herself when she'd insisted on making her own way, separate from the Turner fortune and influence. But perhaps it was the path she had been meant to find all along, one where privilege became purpose, and a moment of injustice became a movement for change. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please consider subscribing and share your thoughts in the comments.